Hi, everyone. It's Julia back with another episode of the Ethical Consumer Podcast. And this is our first three-person conversation on the podcast. Super stoked. Today I have with me Jenn Brown and Chelsea Goucher, and they are from Foraged and Found out of Ketchikan, Alaska. So also our first guests that are not within the contiguous 48 states. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
For sure. So you guys fulfill different roles within the company, but it seems like you have a really, really close-knit network of people. Even just checking out your bios and your smiling photos on the website, it really seems like a team effort, which seems super wonderful. So how did this all start? Jenn, you are the founder. What was your path to get here?
Well, it was really convoluted, so I'll give you the Cliffs Notes. I was born and raised in Southern California in an area called Orange County. And I grew up there, went to high school and college there. And I left school. When I finished school, I moved to Seattle and started working in corporate marketing. And I kind of got my first taste of Northwest cuisine. Moved from there to Sydney, Australia, decided to take a little bit of a sabbatical after about 8 years in the advertising and marketing industry, traveled all over the world for about 2 years. And that landed me for the last 6 months in Ketchikan, Alaska, working as a cruise chef on an overnight sport fishing charter boat. And from there, I took a lot of my knowledge and love of the kind of food that comes out of the ocean here in Alaska, salmon, halibut, spot prawns, you name it, and really kind of honed my culinary talents around those particular food materials. But as I was doing that, I became really ingrained in the Ketchikan community. I absolutely fell in love with the town here. And I started to become better acquainted with a lot of the sort of more non-mainstream food materials that grow wild in the oceans and the land around me here. I'm always curious about food, and I love being outdoors. So being able to be out on the ocean and seeing all of these different types of seaweed that even growing up in California, I never got to experience, kind of got me curious. And it's living off of the land is a very Alaskan kind of way of life, I guess. It's a very Alaskan thing to kind of take what you have and make something useful out of it, whether that's food or just about anything. And so I kind of picked up on that resourcefulness and started to look at ways that people around here have used these materials for a long time. And that just turned into a kind of a fun little side hobby of pickling and playing in the kitchen and making different things out of seaweed and berries that I had never heard of before. And that in turn spun out into this kind of hobby business we decided to call Foraged and Found. And we set up a booth at our local summer fair here called the Blueberry Festival that happens every August in Ketchikan. And we had such an overwhelming response from the community around some of the products that we had made, including retailers asking, can I sell this in my store? How do I get this access to this product regularly? And it kind of clicked on a little light bulb in my business brain where I said, well, hey, maybe we have something here. And it also kind of clicked into a lot of my passion around sharing places I love through food. So traveling, I always connected to a culture or a new region through the food that they served. And Alaska being my new home, I thought, well, maybe this is a really great way I can share Alaska with people who aren't as lucky as me to live here. And from there, I kind of worked out a business plan. I looked into the viability of the business. Of course, there's a lot that I didn't know. But I decided to go for it because it wasn't just about whether or not the business was viable. It was really about the other reasons, the passion that kind of went into why we would do this. And from there, we kind of just set up shop, and one thing led to another, and we've really grown exponentially in just a few years' time.
That's really excellent. I super resonate with wanting to share the food and being immersed in the food culture which is his own little subsect of any other culture in the world, to traveling. I miss it so much. Oh my goodness. But that's been one of the things that have kept my fiance and I like moderately sane and like mostly happy, in addition to a whole lot of yoga, is like recreating some of our favorite dishes from our travels abroad. Like there is such a memory and like a visceral reaction with food. Like food and smells really, really bring back memories, and they make you happy. They make you think about where you were. And even if we can't go to Alaska, we can have some Alaskan flavors here as well. I super love that. Now, Chelsea, you hopped on a few years later, is that correct? But you've been with Foraged and Found for a while.
Yes. So first, I mean, Jenn founded the company and she started it up with Sierra Perro. She's our other business partner. And her and I are both born and raised in Ketchikan, Alaska. So I knew her from high school, but we hadn't really been acquainted in quite a few years. And I actually connected with Jenn through my current full-time corporate job that I still have. And we just started talking about the business. And I was really interested in it because I'd heard through some of my involvement on some different economic development organizations in the region about like this growing mariculture industry. And I knew that people were starting to look at different marine aquatic plants and just like different uses, even for fish waste, just like really expanding the whole industry around seafood to be more than just like fillets of salmon. So I was fascinated by it. Me and her got to talking, we clicked, we became friends. And then as the business started to scale up in December, she asked me to come on and join the business to help mostly with sales, and then also work with her and her extensive marketing background to do some of the marketing activities. So it's been really fun. I'm very honored and excited to be included in the business, and it's definitely a good outlet for me and my passions around eating local, supporting local economies, and just, growing and diversifying the economies in ways that really help people become self-sufficient and not dependent on any one major industry or other force.
There's a recent episode that we did on the podcast. What you're talking about kind of reminds me of not being so reliant on one industry. Mm-hmm. And Iowa recently has had issues with our meatpacking plants and our corn supply and our soybean supply. And the episode was farming for public health. And really a whole lot of Iowa and the Midwest's statewide income comes from these cash crops that get grown here and then sent to all over the world, really. And what happens when those crops are not able to be harvested properly or processed properly? And it's been really interesting. I think that diversification, a lot of people are really looking at that. And like you said, cuisine is much more than just a fillet of salmon. It's all of the other wonderful ingredients that I'd never heard of that you have in your products. I will even completely own up to asking Chelsea, that dressing, do you really combine salmon and berries in the dressing? I said nope. That. I will own it. I will own it. She's like, no, it's salmon berry. Salmon berry.
That's a valid question.
If you don't know what a salmon berry is.
Yes, people are much more familiar with salmon than salmon berries. That's totally valid. And to go back to your diversification point, I mean, with COVID happening in the last year, it really is something that for Ketchikan, economically, other than the fish processing industry, we are a little bit of a one-trick pony around tourism because we're the first and last cruise ship stop on all Alaskan cruises. And with the cruise ship season being entirely canceled for 2020 and the likelihood of it either being canceled or severely scaled back for 2021, there are dozens, if not hundreds of small businesses all around Southeast Alaska that are being severely impacted by the lack of tourism. So that gives industries like us, manufacturing industries, an opportunity to step in and say, hey, we have an opportunity here to create jobs for people who are losing their seasonal employment. And it's beyond just working at our facility and our plant. It's also, working with fish processing contractors to process kelp and other aquatic plants, who they then employ a subsector of our community. It's working with the up and coming kelp farmers like Chelsea's mentioned, who are also employing members of our community. It's kind of both creating jobs within our organization, but then also creating economic opportunity for partner businesses that then allow them to retain and or hire people who have lost their jobs because our primary industry has really taken a hit with the pandemic.
Sure, most definitely. It's nice that you're able to kind of shift and able the dreaded P word pivot. Everyone uses the word pivot, but you've been able to pivot, and you've been able to help your Alaskan economy too, with being able to have something that is not as affected, and like you said, creating other jobs that are not necessarily just tourism based. I know that's been something I've seen in the news a lot. Places, Costa Rica being one, and the Bahamas, that really a lot of their nationwide income is from the tourism industry. And when that doesn't happen, those industries do not flourish. We'll say it that way. We will say it that way. So I'm hoping that everyone continues to be able to grow and prosper, and you guys are all able to come back from this, and hopefully, again, with more diversified interests and income, that Alaska is just fortified even more for the future, and not as much relying on tourism, because that's a difficult thing to rely on. But so kelp is one of your main ingredients, and we've actually had another kelp guest on. So here I am, Iowa girl in the Midwest, learning way more about kelp than I ever thought I would. And it is a really, really interesting plant and species, and the process behind it and how beneficial it is just magical to me. It's such a wonderful thing. Now, was this the first ingredient that you were kind of playing with? What was your first product?
So the first time I ever went out to harvest aquatic plants, I harvested bull kelp. I believe I harvested some sea lettuce, which is an algae. And I also, that summer, it wasn't the season when I first went out, I did harvest my first sea asparagus, or seasonings, or salicornia. That one has a lot of names. And the bull kelp was the first primary product that we really spent a lot of time with. We did things like dehydrate it and figure out ways to kind of turn that into seasoning mixes and blends. And we spent a lot of time pickling it. Just different flavors, figuring out different brines, that sort of thing. And that helped me kind of start to get and understand. We ate it raw a little bit too. You can do it. I don't necessarily recommend it for a texture, from a flavor and texture perspective, but you can do that. And that really helped me kind of understand the flavor profile and the texture profile of the material itself to figure out how it will work in other products. At the same time, I was upskilling myself on understanding how the processed foods industry works and how to actually process things according to the FDA regulations and all of the different scientific points that you really need to hit in order to have a safe food product. So kind of working those two things together to make sure that we were having something that was delicious and, addictive and eatable and not too scary. Because when you're asking somebody to eat seaweed who's never really tried it before, presenting it in a familiar way is a really great way to kind of overcome that dissonance.
Yeah.
And also make sure that, we're compliant, we're following everything that we need to follow. And also thinking about the realities of being in a geographically isolated area. So, putting things as shelf stable would be really important for us, because shipping things refrigerated or frozen can be very cost prohibitive, and adding that onto a price point down in the lower 48, on top of being like, eat seaweed from Alaska. Oh, and it's going to cost a little bit extra because it's a refrigerated product. It really helped kind of guide our product strategy moving forward. I like to say strategy, but I wouldn't say it was very planned. It was just kind of like, we're messing around, we're going to figure out what happens kind of thing. Now we're definitely a little more strategic, but so bull kelp was kind of our first love. Sea asparagus on a personal level is my favorite aquatic plant. It's delicious. I eat it raw off the beach all the time. It cooks up, it sautés really well when you can get it fresh. And what we make with it is a pesto sauce that's probably our best-selling, most popular product. And what the sea asparagus does in that particular product is it helps kind of replace some of the salt content because it's a very salty sea succulent that grows in kind of brackish, marshy beach areas where there's a freshwater output from a lake or a river that comes up where the ocean tide comes and covers it for a certain number of hours per day. So it picks up a lot of that salt and a lot of those really good trace minerals that the ocean provides. And then that allows us to create a lower salt end product.
That's one thing that actually one of our previous guests, this was 12 Tides, Pat Schnettler, he's based in San Francisco actually, and they have seaweed snack. They have kelp puffs.
Cool.
And the original flavor is sea salt. And I said, did you have to play around with your flavorings much? And he's working with a chef that is doing most of the flavoring for them. But he said he really didn't have to add any salt because of the salt from the ocean. It's already there. And if you've ever gone swimming in the ocean, I know you guys have, I have. Oh, it is a particular brand of salty. Like, it is not like you over salted your food. It's like, it's, you don't forget. Briny. Yeah. That's a good one. Excellent. So you started mostly with the bullwhip kelp. And then you said you had a market start, the Blueberry Festival. Was that it?
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Okay. Yep. So what were the first products that and of course, I'm sure they've evolved a little bit, but what were the first, what we're going to consider market consumer packaged goods that you had at the Blueberry Festival?
Our first Blueberry Festival was interesting because it was very ad hoc. Like I said, there wasn't much strategy behind it. It was just, what are we going to go hike for and forage today? So we definitely had pickled bull kelp in a few different flavors. I can't remember if there's still flavors we market now, probably dill. I'm not sure though, because after that summer was when we really went into true recipe development. We also sold sea asparagus, but we sold it kind of flash frozen in packages as well, which a lot of people liked that. But and we sold salmonberry jam, wild blueberry jam, spruce tip jelly. We sold salmonberry simple syrup, I think, fireweed jelly, which is a wildflower that grows up here in Alaska. Really delicious, kind of delicate floral flavor like rose water or lavender wood. I think that, and we had some of our seasoning mixes then as well. Again, I'd have to look back in like my notebooks or something to remember everything that we had. And I'm sorry I didn't do that before we met. But yeah, it was really just a kind of wherever our creativity took us. And then we just made enough to, sell at that particular festival.
Sure. Well, it sounds like, you kind of started with, like you said, Foraged and Found. You went out and got your stuff and got ready for the Blueberry Festival and made all of your things. And now you're just doing it on a slightly larger, a little bit more intentional scale where you kind of have to plan for your foraging. You can't just go out and into, you said, what was the word that you said where the sea asparagus grows? Brackish?
Brackish. Yeah.
Yes, that's not a word I'm familiar with actually. So I'm assuming it's describing some sort of landscape alongside the coast there. You said there's seawater that actually, or ocean water that mixes with fresh water.
That's the definition of brackish.
Interesting. There we go. Yeah. Defined it for myself. Wonderful. So with this this new intention, I'm sure you've had some different challenges for sure. As Chelsea mentioned in our intro call, as we were planning a little bit for this awesome episode, you have a somewhat short growing and foraging season in Alaska, which is probably one of your biggest challenges. What does that look like for you? Are you mid-forage or harvest? Are you kind of post, or are you gearing up for something?
We are complete. So like most things in Alaska, the time to harvest just about any wild material here, whether it's alive, like a fish or a plant, is April to September or through September. That's kind of when all the salmon run. That's when all the berries are blooming at various points throughout the summer. And that is when all of our aquatic plants are at maturity and ready for harvest. And you're correct that one of our biggest challenges as we become a national business is scaling access to the raw material. The short season isn't really anything that it's kind of embedded into the Alaskan culture. It's like hustle really hard for 6 months, and then you can kind of kick back a little bit for 6 months, which I like. But what we've had to do is really kind of evolve how we harvest and how we preserve the raw material in order to process throughout a longer season if we need to. So with the bull kelp in particular, we contracted with a commercial fishing boat this year who normally fishes for salmon. It's a type of boat called a seiner. And what they do is they have a big fish hold. They're usually large, anywhere from like 50 to 80 feet long boats. They have a huge, what's called a power skiff that comes with them. And what they do to catch salmon normally is use the skiff to kind of draw a big circle with a net behind the larger boat. They connect that net to the other side, and they kind of just haul that whole net up to get, thousands of pounds of fish on the deck and then into the fish hold. So they have a big storage capacity, which is great. That's full of water, which the kelp would like. And they also have access to a couple of different vessels that allow them to more easily harvest the kelp because it's pretty shallow, usually where it attaches to the water, probably shallower than you would want to take an 80-foot long boat. So the power skiff is handy. And what we were able to start evolving this year is working with those fishermen to bring the kelp in for us when it works for their other fisheries that they're doing with the salmon fishing and whatnot. So we're still able to get access to wild material, which is important for some of our products. And we're also able to kind of diversify the income for fishermen. So if like this year, for example, was not the best salmon year, and it's not something that can be predicted. It's pretty, it's very roller coaster for a lot of those families. And we know that for the fishing family that we partnered with, they were really grateful for the opportunity to kind of shore up their income this summer by having another permit to fish on that's not just dependent on the salmon and the prices that are determined by the fish processors for salmon. So we're looking to expand that out a little bit more next year and across a couple of different species, because that'll take some of the pressure off of us as the business owners to procure wild material. What we do know is that for our aquatic plant material, abundance is not a problem at all. It's incredibly abundant everywhere we go, and the sea asparagus, the sea lettuce, and the bull kelp. And we always make sure that we're maintaining sustainable harvest practices. We're teaching every single person that we contract with exactly how to harvest in the most sustainable way. And we're also, all permits are governed by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And so they also are kind of making sure that we're diversifying harvest areas, that our harvest methods are allowing regrowth of kelp beds or sea asparagus patches, whatnot. And that we're, so there's several different checkpoints across the board that allow us to be able to sustainably harvest at scale here. On top of that, we're also starting to work with some of the up and coming kelp farmers in the area to see what they're able to do with growing a lot of these different aquatic plant species that we work with. Because as a business owner, my security of or access to raw material is one of our biggest potential risks. Mm-hmm. Mother Nature, we've worked with her for a few years now, and she can be pretty fickle. Look up to her. She's the boss, not me. If she doesn't want to have the kelp come up on when we were ready to process, then the kelp isn't coming and we're not processing. So learning to kind of work around some of those things by having a little bit more stability and access is a valuable thing for us too, which is why we are partnering with our nonprofits and for-profit farmers to kind of understand how can we make sure that we're having a stable business moving forward and we're not having to cancel sales contracts and stuff like that because we can't supply.
Right. And going from the farmers markets to scaling up to be able to very shortly have e-commerce and be able to ship to the 48 states. That consistency is really important. Having worked in a health food store before where we sold a lot of similar products that you might not find in your big box grocery stores, being able to get them once customers want them and request them, it's a little scary sometimes. It's really scary being the middleman between the person that's like hey, do you have any more? Is it still back ordered? I'm really sorry, we can't get it for you right now. But it's sad. It's such a wonderful thing when there's such a demand. And being wild crafted, which is so wonderful. And I think a lot of people would argue too, better for the environment as opposed to having all of these mass farms, unfortunately, like in the Midwest. But you have kind of perhaps not an easier time. Every industry, every area, every plant, or what do I want to say, a farm animal, even, if you will, animals and plants, they're all going to have their specific challenges. But it sounds like you're at least able to do it in a way that currently you're supplementing with ethical farming practices with your wild crafted, wild found, and foraged and found. And then you're still working to improve what farmers are already doing and working a whole lot on the education side of things so that as you scale, you can do it responsibly, which is challenging and so commendable, because I would love to think that every single company out there has that in mind, but I know once that scramble starts, you just keep scrambling and there's supply and demand, and it's the best blessing. But how do you achieve that? You have to maintain kind of that growth on both sides of things. It's challenging.
Absolutely. Yes. And one other thing we have been able to do as well is freeze a lot of our raw material and use it for later processing, which does help with the short season. So we can go get kelp, we can fish to the max amount allowed on our permit. And even if we only need a fraction of that, we have plenty in the freezer. If a big order comes in January, we can fill that order because we have access to the material to make that. It's just a matter of ordering the other ingredients, making sure we have the containers and making it happen. So that's also kind of another way we're trying to future-proof as much as we can. And it's why for our national launch, we are leaning a little more heavily into our aquatic plant products because we have a more steady supply of that material ready to go if we were to get large orders, whereas we're still figuring out the best way to source and access some of the land-based materials. But there is a vision to really showcase the breadth of what Alaska has to offer on the land and the sea, when we're able to do that in a sustainable and scalable way.
Sure. And with the berries, I suppose it's really difficult. I mean, are there salmonberry farms in addition, or are they still just mostly wild grown?
It's a wild grown berry for sure. Now, wild farming is not something that's unknown here. There's a lot of people who have salmonberry patches in their backyards or on an adjacent property, and they'll, throw eggshells and coffee grounds and things like that just to encourage the soil to put out berries that are, twice the size of a normal one. So it's not that there are like commercial farms here. It's more of a, sort of if you find a spot that becomes your spot, you kind of nurture it without really getting too involved. That is something that we've, looked into or considered doing or looking into what will be possible there. But again, right now, we're just trying to move forward with where we know we have a winner. Let's test the market nationally. Let's see how that goes. If it seems like there's an appetite for Alaskan-based food products at the scale that we think there might be, then okay, let's figure out how do we get that supply going to really start scaling out some of the other products that we've tested that are doing really well locally.
Sure. Those ones I'm assuming are going to be more of the jams and the jellies and things like that are, that you have a certain supply for at least a market, or maybe a local shop, but maybe not a shipping situation.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Some of our salad dressings, and we have a barbecue sauce made from wild blueberries and things like that. Yeah, it's great, but it's pretty time consuming to A, get the material, and B, right now at the scale that we're trying to move up into, trying to diversify our production line too much, just kind of creates a diminishing return at some point. So.
Now, Chelsea, do I remember correctly that your full-time job also, as you said, was it with the Chamber of Commerce?
No, I've been involved with the Chamber here in Ketchikan for a long time. It just kind of got me interested in concepts around economic development, building sustainable communities, that sort of thing. But my day job is actually in transportation. So I've been bringing some of that knowledge and insight into the business as well, because obviously it's a huge thing. I mean, that's one of the obstacles that the Alaskan economy has to overcome, is that we're geographically separate. And so there's a huge cost both for importing raw materials and exporting finished goods. And so we don't have a lot of value added manufacturing in Alaska at all.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it's definitely something to be overcome, but we're really committed to like keeping a base of manufacturing in Ketchikan and creating those jobs, creating that extra diversification and sustainability in the local economy. But it's definitely been it's challenging. We really have to think about things like shipping because it does add to our overall cost of goods.
Mm-hmm. I was curious because, again, being from the Midwest too, and not really knowing, and of course, honestly, a lot of maps out there are not necessarily to scale, and it has the U.S. has this gigantic country, and we're not actually that big, guys. Everything's just a little bit skewed. So my relation to how far away is Alaska from me, but even how far away is Alaska from like Washington? That is something that, and I think I looked it up. I believe you could do 6 hours by car, but there was a small mountain range that you had to drive through, which it looks a lot shorter on a map if you were to just drive down that coast. But that coast is, in fact, it would not appear to be drivable, as it has you going inland quite a bit. But Ketchikan is at the southernmost point, if I recall, from the map. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So would you...
Yeah, we're one of the most southernmost cities in Alaska, and we're also on an island. So yeah,
yes.
You can't here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring a kayak on the top of my car. We'll be fine. It is an island. That was it as well. Yes, yes. So when you said value added, you mean overhead cost or shipping cost, things like that?
What I mean by value-added manufacturing is what is unfortunately a reality in the Alaskan economy is that we're one of the most abundant places on earth as far as natural resources, whether it's oil and gas, timber, fish, kelp, minerals, you name it. But so much of the actual manufacturing of the raw material gets done elsewhere.
Oh,
so
okay.
like even our oil industry, for example, we have all this oil, we ship it out and it actually gets refined elsewhere and then sent back up to Alaska. Like it's crazy. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. And so it's something that, regardless of, who the administration is in the state government, diversification and value added manufacturing is always touted as something that Alaskans really need to do because that's where the jobs are created. And, not just cutting down a tree and shipping it off, but creating something valuable and meaningful that comes from the local place and isn't just being basically exported in the raw for people to make that money elsewhere.
Sure.
It's an interesting dilemma, I guess, that Alaska has. And I think a lot of it is because of geography. And we're a massive state with a very small population. So there's a lot of challenges in Alaska, but it's a worthy challenge.
Well, and I think
it sounds like it.
At the risk of going too political, which I know isn't the point of this, is that it would kind of almost help benchmark, so to speak, the resources that we do harvest from the land here, because it becomes less of just a highest bidder scenario of who's going to pay the most for our resources and more of what is the value that it provides back into the communities that we're taking the resources from, which is what we're trying to do with Foraged and Found as well. We're not just harvesting a bunch of kelp, freezing it and sending it to Iowa to get packed by somebody, but give them a recipe and call it a day. We're really trying to harvest the material, turn it into a product, and then send it down to the lower 48 to be sold. It's made here in Alaska. That's important to us. I do wish that more industries and business leaders felt the same way, but maybe one day.
No, I mean, and I think the thing is I think people recognize it, but it comes down to cost. I mean, theoretically, you could harvest the kelp and ship it to a co-packer, and it would probably cost us a lot less money, but that's not what we want to do.
Sure.
That's the mission we want to go into the business with and how we want to operate. So.
I've had similar conversations. Our first podcast guest actually was a coffee roaster. And it's a similar sort of situation. And with that recent episode of Farming for Public Health, Iowa and our corn and soybeans. Soybeans is plural, corn is not. Those are our two main exports too. And with this whole farming for public health episode, it kind of focused on all of this is being grown here. All of the pesticides that are being used are on our lands, in our water, in our air, and then it goes elsewhere.
Yep.
So we're doing all of the work here for it and taking all of the environmental hit for it. And then someone else gets to package and make and send and do all of these things. And that value added is a new term for me, and I like that. And value added back into the community too. Because that was just kind of a mind-blowing thing for me, and I think you can hear it on that episode. Like I'm fairly well versed in all of these things, but then I'm still putting two and two together that, all that cornfield that I just drove through, nope, that's not staying here. Not at all. But all the stuff that goes into the soil is.
Yep.
And with the coffee roaster, thankfully, Brian from Raw Street Coffee Roasting in Tama, Iowa, hello, he has actually visited all of their coffee producers and make sure that they're treating their employees correctly. It is direct trade, not even special. It is direct and specialty, not even fair trade, but direct. So he only works specifically with that company, thankfully. And with coffee, it's a similar situation with, it's not just going to the highest bidder. All of these kelp plants and your huge, beautiful harvest is not just going into a big vat or pallets of things to be divided to the highest bidder. You know where your food is going because you're handling it yourself, which is something very special. And I think something that I'm thankful that most of the companies that we have on this podcast are doing that. But it's almost like this renaissance period in the food industry that we're kind of getting back to it and catching on to all of the problems that we've brought upon ourselves with this supply and demand and outsourcing. And it seems like there's a huge movement now for that forageable, homemade, local, in your own state or region at least. But then I think the best part about being able to share the things that you're making in your own state, your own region, I get to try Alaskan cuisine because of you. Otherwise, I would love to go there someday. I would totally couch surf, for the record. But I would love, but that's not it. That's not currently, unfortunately, thanks COVID, in my plan right now. But I've always wanted to go. I have a friend in Canada that I would love to go visit. But you're able to have a literal taste of someone else's culture and done the way they would do it, not just going to, hey, I love some Trader Joe's every now and then, but you're not just going to Trader Joe's and picking up a spice mix that's supposed to be a specific flair, again, from Trader Joe's. But anywho's, yeah. Oh, I think that's wonderful. And I think that, you're really contributing a lot to people's experience of Alaska, even if we can't go, but then also your own community too, and your own economy, and that being able to keep that a little closer to the chest is always going to be beneficial. I think this year has kind of shown that too. Bittersweet situation for that, but it's exciting.
Yeah. I think you really covered off on kind of all the reasons why this was so compelling to us. It was the culinary aspect and being able to share that. And then also the community aspect and being able to kind of sustain that. And then, also just having a business that's, ties in a lot of my personal experience in the business and culinary world and is an enjoyable thing to do with a couple of girls that I really love. So.
Yes. And really, one of the things, guys, you have to go visit their website and their Instagram. I'm remembering as I'm scrolling through a picture of somebody, I don't know who it was, holding this beautiful bundle of sea asparagus on your Instagram. And then all of your pictures on your website, they're not like your typical headshot or something like that. It is just like you're in your kitchen, you're having a great time, you're out on a fishing dock, stuff like that. That's just like real down to earth kind of things, like with your brand and with yourselves. And you guys just seem to have the most wonderful business and friend relationship that I can see on my computer screen right now. I love it. That's the way it should be done. So you have there's you two and there's Sierra as well. So you three are kind of in charge of most of the operations, and you each do your own thing. I think Sierra maybe had an adorable picture of her showing some food on her counter or something like that. I don't quite remember, perhaps.
Yeah. So Sierra would be here, but we just wrapped production for the year a day and a half ago. So she's down in the facility doing the whole clear out, getting everything kind of boxed up and ready to go. And so she covers off primarily on like the day-to-day production needs. Chelsea is kind of marketing and sales is her corner, and I kind of do all of it.
Okay, sure.
Wherever somebody needs help doing something. Obviously, I have a lot of marketing background as well, so I kind of help out pretty heavily on those sorts of projects as well. But that's sort of the way that we're organized across each other. But really, I mean, Chelsea's been in the processing facility this year, helping out when we had, we were running behind and had to get caught up on production. And, Sierra looks at the website mock-ups and the, design and gives feedback on it too. So it really is a collaborative effort. I wouldn't want it any other way.
Sure.
So.
It is. Beautiful. It's fun. It's fun to walk in the kitchen and I'm like, okay, tell me what to do.
All of you get to do all of the things, but then you specialize kind of in one area. I think that's a beauty. And then you understand the facets of the business. I think sometimes there can be miscommunications going on between, okay, here's the product. This is how I want you to do it. Now, okay, I need you to understand that this is the time frame. Though you said that Alaskan harvesting, that's just kind of been built in. Everyone kind of understands that at this point, but you're all just doing it together and building this wonderful community in your community. That's beautiful. And with the shipping, so you will be shipping to the 48 states sooner rather than later, as in like when this episode comes out, we're going to say within a few weeks of this episode airing, second week of November, I think is what we have on the calendar. So we will be able to get your goods here in the Midwest. And let's see, I'm assuming you have a couple different shipping facilities. Will you be in all 48 states? Is that possible?
We should be able to fulfill orders in all 48 states. We will be sending our product down to warehousing and fulfillment in the Midwest.
Okay.
So now this is before we sent it. We haven't tested any of the fulfillment or anything yet, but we have been told and we expect that you will be able to order from our website and have it shipped anywhere in the 50 U.S. states.
Hawaii gets to play too.
Yes. I mean, it's only fair. They're like our cousins.
I know.
A little bit. The humpback whales travel between the two of our homes.
It's beautiful.
But, we should be able to do that. We're targeting just after Thanksgiving or the beginning of December that will all be live and ready to go. So we're sprinting towards that finish line as fast as we can.
Super. And then as far as the shippables you'd mentioned before, and you do have a wide array. You have pickles, you have salsas, you have sauces, dressings, jams, jellies, salt, seasonings, all of the things that you could want. But we may see a slightly limited menu at first, but as you start to scale up with your responsible kelp harvesting and perhaps kind of looking into some more berry scaling and things like that, we may see new product drops in the future.
Yep, absolutely. So what we're having available at launch will be our kelp salsa, which there's 4 different flavors that range from mild to spicy. We have 3 different flavors of kelp pickles that will be available, and 2 of our flavors, the dill and the bread and butter pickles, are available in slices and in spears. And there's a taking off on the ocean, and it's a little noisy. I don't know if you can hear it or not.
That's all right. I can hear you talking more than I can hear the plane. This is Alaska, guys. When they started the call, they were in front of their windows, and it is just this beautiful Alaskan coastline with the classic fog over the ocean and just wonderful, wonderful things.
Yeah. There's a float plane runway right outside there too, so they take off and they're quite noisy.
There you go. That's all right.
We will also have our sea asparagus pesto in 2 different sizes available, and then I believe that by early to mid next year we should be launching our kelp marinara and arrabbiata pasta sauces.
Okay.
So,
oh my
yeah.
goodness. That sounds wonderful. And then you may have on the website, I mean, people should definitely check back, and we will be posting it on our Instagram, Facebook, social media sources. And then you guys will, of course, be posting that launch as well. And you can be found at Foraged, letter N, Found, AK. Foraged and Found, AK is in Alaska. So we can check in with you there. We can check in with you on your website, foragedandfound.com. Again, letter N for and. And we'll be able to see all of your new stuff. And you're currently doing a rebranding as well. So some of the pictures right now may not start to match the pictures in the future. So we'll watch for that beautiful rebrand coming as well.
Yes, the labels and the website will be completely updated, photos updated, everything. Hopefully by the time this podcast airs, if not, within a week.
Sure. And we will post that for sure. I know we're playing with our little deadlines here. Like, can we get as close to launch as possible? I think we can do it if all of those little squares fall into place as they should. But if they don't, we're flexible. So,
well, okay. I try, but I'm not the best.
Oh, I love it. This has been so enjoyable. And the questions that I always ask every guest is, do you have any suggestions for consumers? And do you have a favorite food other than your own? And there's two of you. So who wants to go first while the other one is thinking about their answer?
Oh, man.
I know.
I guess if I had a suggestion for the consumer, it would be eat vegetables that come from the ocean. They're really good for you in a lot of ways that soil farmed vegetables aren't. You get a lot of nutrients that you normally have to take in supplement form from kelp, sea asparagus, sea lettuce, those types of things. And my favorite food, I love food so much.
That's usually the hardest question for everybody.
Well, yeah, because I mean, we're all in this industry where we're like, we love to eat. I don't know. I mean,
or what's one of your
we make, right?
I mean, you can claim your own favorite food. I see nothing wrong with that. Or a favorite food from your travels. Is there a specific food or smell that just sparks one of those memories? Again, this is always the hardest question.
I don't know if I can pick one.
Okay.
Honestly, I really don't.
All of it.
Food way too much to choose something above all else.
We can say all of it. We can say Alaskan cuisine.
Sure.
Mine is batatas bravas from Spain. I've never actually shared my own on the podcast, but it was batatas bravas from Barcelona. That was just like, we were just there last year, a little over a year ago, and that is just one of those foods that we consistently make in our own kitchen that just
yeah,
it's
that
wonderful
sounds
thing.
amazing.
Wonderful thing. I know.
Yeah, I mean, I have meals that will stay in my memory forever, but I don't know if I have like a favorite food.
Sure.
So.
I don't blame you. What about you, Chelsea?
My recommendation to consumers, kind of dovetailing off what Jen said, would just be to research kelp. I know that kelp and seaweed might be an ingredient that maybe there's a certain flavor profile that you might think that it's going to taste like, or you might have a preconceived notion about how it's used or what it might be like in a product. And it could be maybe intimidating to try a kelp-based salsa or pasta sauce. But, you know, we have been very thoughtful with our recipes, and they're very approachable and flavorful. And I think that when you do a little research into kelp, there are these trace nutrients, like iodine for one is an example, which is really important for regulating thyroid health. And there's also this component with kelp too, where the kelp beds themselves, whether wild or farmed, are actually very positive for the ocean environment and help counter things like ocean acidification, which is something that people are increasingly aware of as being a potential problem for our ocean environment. So I would just say, research kelp, look at it. You'll see that there's some great benefits to it. And so I hope that would inspire you to overcome any skepticism and try our products when you get the chance, because it's pretty cool. And at the risk of sounding totally basic, my favorite food is probably chili or anything Mexican.
Yeah.
I see nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. And guys, if you want to have a listening experience on a little bit of Kelp too, that episode with 12 Tides, Pat Schnettler. Pat grew up in a conservationist family in San Francisco. And that was really interesting. That was my personal first exposure to kelp as well, because again, in the Midwest, we don't get a lot. And I think recently the kelp industry is starting to be discovered as this wonderful regenerative, automatically regenerative industry. But at the same time, now that kelp is kind of catching on in certain areas, again, sustainable harvesting practices. I truly think that kelp may be the next kale with how much. You can quote me on that. Do you really?
Yeah. Kelp is the new kale.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to need to know where you got that tank top, because now I want one too. But truly, as I'm like exploring this industry too and looking for similar businesses and brands that are putting sustainability and the longevity of marine life and the planet and agriculture at the forefront of their business, it's become very obvious that kelp is going to be in the spotlight. It's already there, and it's just going to shine even brighter. So I'm excited that I get to talk to you guys before you guys are like too famous for me and you're like, we're busy. But it's never, thanks. It truly is, and there's a lot of conservation effort, as you said, going into educating on proper harvesting and being able to work with nonprofits that also plant more regenerative kelp farms at the same rate, if not more, than what they're harvesting, being able to supplement the wild kelp, and in addition to having farmed kelp, which it sounds like you guys are kind of exploring with some of your kelp farms, being able to supplement your wild foraging too. It's really a very, very interesting industry. Listeners, go and check it out, because we don't have a lot of information on this yet, but it will be the next kale. It will be. Well, thank you so much, guys. Anything else that you want to share? Anything else that you'd like to recommend or say to our listeners?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. I love the concept of your podcast, The Ethical Consumer. I think it's so important that we all think about where our money is going. Yeah. And I just love that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for being on. This has been so much fun. And guys, you can check them out in stores and markets in, again, Southeast Alaska if you are there, on Ketchikan on the islands, or on the mainland too. And then we will shortly see an e-commerce site and be able to ship. And then are you going to do wholesale in the 48 or perhaps 49 as well?
Yes, we will. We're wholesaling in Alaska already, and we have plans to start wholesaling in the lower 48 as soon as we can get those contracts signed.
For sure. Excellent. And we'll have updates on those, as will you guys, along the way. So thank you so much for being on, listeners. Go ahead and go check them out, Foraged and Found AK and foragedandfound.com, and we will see your products soon in the States down below, and we will remember our neighbors up to the north, because you guys are a very important state in our 50, as is your cousin Hawaii down in the south. So we're going to keep remembering that we are all together. We are all one unit, and I love that value added. That is definitely what I'm taking myself from this episode. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.